Picture a time when a test was hard, even sort of what you're doing in that moment. So let's jump right in. We're at 10:30. Here's why I had you do this. The reason I had you picture a time that a test was hard, what you were actually doing in that moment. It's an old teaching trick. It's in fancy teacher jargon called activating a schema. What that really means, though, is activating prior knowledge. It's almost like warming up an engine or like warming up before you exercise, whereby reigniting those connections that are already there in the brain, it makes it easier to see how all the stuff we're about to talk about connects and is relevant to your real experience. And it makes it a little easier to remember 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 semesters from now. That activating prior knowledge is also a really good study strategy for what it's worth. The way that can look is if I'm opening up a book and a textbook and it says the Industrial Revolution, to take a moment and first go, wait, what's all the stuff I remember about the Industrial Revolution? And I'm reigniting those connections so it's easier to build stronger, longer lasting connections. You can do the same thing right before a class, where in those moments where a class is kind of settling into itself, if you think to yourself, wait, I'm going to actively picture as much as I can what was all the stuff we talked about last class. It makes it easier to connect all the stuff you're learning to those connections that are already there and build those a little bit stronger connections. So that all said, this is the game plan of the big stuff we're going to be talking about today. First is a kind of list of best practices, stuff to do that night before and morning of a test so that you're going into the test with literally as many advantages as possible and as few disadvantages as possible. Second, we're going to take one step forward, so it's no longer the morning before the test, it's the test of the test. And we're going to look at some strategies for test taking, especially when you got those problems that are giving you some grief, giving you more trouble than the others. What are like some really good survival test taking strategies? And then last, we're going to take a really big step back and say, okay, what can I be doing over the course of an entire semester so that I have an organized way where I'm studying so that by the time I get here, I'm just getting myself in the best shape possible. But I'll even tell you right now, this is where a lot of the work is, of slowly breaking down and actually learning the material and putting stuff into long-term memory over the course of weeks and sometimes months. If you are here for even one of those standardized tests like the GRE, which is a standardized test you might have to take if you want to go to grad school, or if you're thinking about going to law school, the LSAT, or if you're thinking about, if you're graduated from the nursing program and looking at the nursing exams, this becomes even more important because this is a way to kind of set up a study system when you don't have that organization of a class. Last for now, so with the time we have, this is something that just students have asked me to talk more about in these presentations. So I put together some last resources so you have them on test taking anxiety, ways to manage that anxiety that often comes with tests and test taking. So that's the last thing we'll talk about with the time we have. So here's the way I actually want to ask to start. I have my list of stuff that I really recommend the night before, the morning of. But I want to actually ask you first, what's some of the stuff that you do the night before a test or the morning of? Whether it's study strategies, things you do to refresh, whether it's like rituals, even like lucky socks, whether it's something to just get your head in the zone. The reason I'm asking is, one, I'm just genuinely curious. I always find something new in the list you all make. But two, I want to ask us to kind of pool our resources together. This is one I have not seen before, but I just saw it, and this is exactly what I do: take a walk. There's even, for what it's worth, some studies that show that walking kind of activates the brain in a different way. Walking, it's a study, or even studying and then going for a walk and kind of reviewing it. Great strategy to put that up. I'm seeing lots of good study strategies, studies with a group, flashcards. I think a lot of y'all use Quizlet. Yep, sure enough, there's Quizlet. I saw even like just reviewing notes. Wonderful. I saw someone say cram, which I don't recommend. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And then I also saw someone had exactly my first thing on my list too, which is to get a good night's rest. I want to even really highlight what's not on my list here. So here's what's not on my list. Learn more material the night before a test. Learn that last chapter, the most recent chapter that feels the most murky. That's not on my list. Do that cramming where I'm staying up late trying to figure out even more stuff. Not on my list. Really, all I have on my list the night before is to get a good night's rest. And that's for two reasons. One is maybe the most obvious. The later I stay up, if I'm starting to push to 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., is I'm just liable to end up on the day of the real test, just zonked with a bit of brain fog. And now all of a sudden I'm missing questions that I would have gotten, even if I'm picking up some other questions over here of the stuff I just learned. The bigger reason, though, that I have this on my list, and it's kind of even a theme you'll see throughout the whole list, is that let me put it this way. This is something I used to do that I would even warn you against. It was something I tried that really messed me up, which is sometimes the night before, or even worse, the morning of, right before a test, I would almost get a little nervous, and I would think, you know what? I'm going to go back and try to learn the thing that was bothering me that I don't feel like I'm totally confident in. Or I'd go back to those I would just essentially try to learn more stuff in my head. And then I would get to the test, and it was the weirdest thing. It was like I could remember all the stuff I just learned, but I couldn't remember stuff I knew from further back in the semester. Feel free even just to give a thumbs up in the chat. Anything like that ever happened to you? You learn new stuff right before a test, morning of, night before, and you remember all the stuff you just learned, but it's like the weirdest thing. And even maybe the most frustrating, it all comes rushing back as soon as the test is over. Like, oh, where was it the whole time? I'm seeing a few thumbs up, sure. Yeah. So here's one of the reasons why that can happen. All of our short-term memories actually have a limited capacity, and you can fill them up. And so if that morning before the test, night before the test, if I fill up that short-term memory, it gets harder to reach past that short-term memory into the long-term memory where there's stuff. I kind of have almost blocked my brain a little bit. And so really one of the first big themes you'll see on my list is that as much as possible, before a test, we're trying to keep that short-term memory as empty and clear as possible, almost like a kind of sacred space that we're trying to keep empty and clean. Which I think maybe brings me to this one, avoiding distractions night before a test, maybe even more important, right before a test. And I can tell you, the way I would pitch this, so I, in my job, mercifully don't have to take tests anymore, but I do give presentations like this. And if you ever give a presentation like this, there's just a lot to remember, a lot to keep track of. And so I can tell you, the morning before a presentation, here's what I don't do. I don't turn on the news. I don't go on social media or Reddit or Tumblr. I don't know if Tumblr still exists even. I don't listen to a really interesting podcast on the way to work, because I know that the worst thing that could happen to me right before my presentation, the worst thing that could happen to you right before a test, is you learn something really interesting. Like the podcast says, hey, did you know that not every ancient culture has a word for the color blue? That's so interesting. Why? Why would that be? Do we all see the same color? What does the world look like if you don't have a word for the color? And now, even if I don't realize it, I'm using all this extra processing power on this interesting thing that distracted my brain. Even more important, right before a test, again, I just want to do kind of a temperature of the room. Give me a thumbs up if this has ever happened to you, of right before a test, someone says something that completely knocks you off your game. Like maybe, hey, my buddy took this test 2 hours ago and they said it was really hard. Lots of enthusiastic yeses in the chat for that. Yeah. Again, it's that from night before, but especially the closer and closer I get to the test, I'm trying to keep that short-term memory as empty as possible. So what I'm really doing, I even know, for what it's worth, is some people swear by they have to study the night before, and that's okay. But if you're studying, what we're trying to do is really lightly touch the material that you already know. Kind of like we talked about at the beginning, like activating prior knowledge. If you do that before the night before a test, even a little, maybe early in the morning before, of really lightly touching the material that's already there in your long-term memory, reigniting some of those connections, that actually makes it sometimes a little easier to dive back down and pull up stuff from a long-term memory. But I'm really trying to keep that short-term memory, that learning new interesting things space, as empty and clear as possible. All right, here's the next big theme on my list that I want to point to. So if you take a class on test taking, like a month-long class, this is the thing that they hammer home over and over again, which is really to the night before and morning of a test, keep things as normal and routine as humanly possible. So what that means is whatever a bedtime usually is, that should be around the bedtime. a night before a test. If you have a really big breakfast in the morning, do that. If you don't eat breakfast in the morning, it's the wrong time to start experimenting right before a test. Although, if you don't eat breakfast before morning, for what it's worth, there have been some studies that show a breakfast that's high in protein, low in sugar, like let's say eggs or something with peanut butter, actually kind of helps break food. The reason for that high protein and low in sugar is the sugar can make you crash, especially what you don't want on a test. Really, the idea though is if you drink coffee every day, drink coffee. If you don't, it's the wrong time right before a test to start drinking coffee, or to even do like 5-hour energy or whatever to try to get in the zone, because you don't know what's going to happen. And what we're really more than anything trying to do is this: from the night before all the way up to the real test, we're trying to keep things as routine as possible so the brain's a little more relaxed. Brains like routine. They don't like lots of curveballs being thrown at them. And so the more routine, the more the brain can kind of be like, oh, I'm okay with what's going on. If we start throwing a lot of curveballs, the brain starts to get a little antsy and a little off balance, which is not the right foot. Here's the last two just small, faster things I'm going to highlight. One is two writing strategies. First writing strategy, actually, I don't think is on this list, but it's as soon as you get the test, so the test is in your hands, the clock started. If it's a paper test, or if you have the benefit of having scratch paper, one thing you can do is write down literally anything you're worried about forgetting. So that could be dates, formulas, definitions, concepts, anything that you're worried about forgetting, to write it down first thing as soon as the bell starts. You could literally do it. First page of the test, last page of the test, it's paper, scratch paper, if you're allowed scratch paper. What that can do is, first, it makes it so that now you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You're not using up that brain space. But it's also, by writing down all the stuff I'm worried about forgetting, I've cleared out even more short-term memory. I'm in even a better place. The other thing, writing strategy, is even if you're feeling some of those worries, some of those bigger anxious feelings, whether it's night before or morning of a test, it can weirdly help to even just literally write them down. Like, literally, I'm worried about blank. I'm worried I'm going to forget this. I'm worried I'm going to mess up, yada, yada. There's something about writing on a page those feelings of worry, those feelings of anxiousness, that makes them visually smaller. They look more organized and more manageable. And it's even, you're in charge. You're the one organizing this. You're taking a step of action. It's a whole lot easier to deal with than that kind of sometimes otherwise whirl of undefined feelings of nervousness. And it truly does a kind of magic trick, and it can get a better sense of real test. All right, this is the last thing I'm going to really highlight on this list, which is to survey a test. And I'm going to talk about doing this with a paper test, an online test, and also a standardized test. And so paper test, this is easiest. What this looks like with a paper test is really just flipping through and taking note of, like, okay, how long is this test? What's generally on it? Where generally is this test going to go? It's kind of like how when you enter in an address into Google Maps, you look right of like, okay, where is this route going to take me? What turns are we going to make? Am I going to jump onto a freeway? Is there a lot of traffic? How long is it going to be? So the back of your brain has kind of an understanding of where you're going to be driving to, instead of just putting in the address, pressing play, and hearing each direction for the first time as it comes at you, which is just a little more difficult to manage. That's the same idea here. We're trying to figure out, where is this test generally going to go? Because what you might find is something like, the second page of this test actually has a lot of stuff that I feel more comfortable with, that I feel really confident in. So I'm going to start there, pick up some stuff I know I can get, build up that confidence. In part, what we're trying to avoid is you're cruising through a test, getting everything right, and feeling really good and on time. And then the last page of the test is something like essay questions, which you weren't prepared for, weren't expecting, don't feel like you had enough time for. And now, just from not having an understanding of what's going to be on the test, is something that knocks you off your game. I will tell you last really fast, I had a teacher that really tried to push this point at us when I was in high school. And I don't think you can do stuff like this anymore, but he used to kind of play almost practical jokes where, like, there'd be one page in the test that was worth 2,000 points, everything else was worth 5. Or there'd be like a page of the test that just said, write down C for the next 16 answers, And the reason he did that is he really wanted to push that point and to have a plan going into the test, a sense of what the test is going to look like. So paper test, it's easiest. You just flip through it. For an online test, I want to be clear. I really don't recommend clicking the next button over and over again because it's just going to eat up a ton of time. If it's an online test, the way you do this surveying it is by actually paying more attention to any materials the course instructor gives you about the test. So that's paying more attention to any study guides you get, more attention to anything that on the syllabus that describes the test, and it's even okay to talk to a professor or a course instructor with questions like, hey, can you help me understand a little what the test is going to look like about how many questions, how long might it be, are there it's more important with an online test to do that work beforehand. So again, you're going in with as much as possible a kind of general understanding of what kind of test you're going to be looking at. So that's paper, online. Last is standardized tests. With standardized tests, what becomes the best way to actually survey a standardized test is to take practice tests over and over again. Maybe you did this for the SAT or SAT. If you're, let's say, for example, doing the LSAT, the GRE, the nursing exams, as many tests as you can take, practice tests, what that does is it gets the very back of your brain really comfortable. And those standardized tests sometimes are even weirdly formatted. So we're getting the brain really comfortable with how this is going to look, how it's going to feel, how long it's going to take, so that when you get to the real test, you get to just focus on the questions and not even think about all the kind of sometimes weird structures or weird formats they got. All right, that is the stuff I really wanted to highlight on my list. What I want to ask you right now is this, to write down some stuff and kind of make your own list. Whether it's anything I just talked about, anything, I would really recommend look through that chat. There was a ton of good stuff, but I really want to ask you to literally on a piece of paper write down, here's some of the things I'm seeing or the things I'm hearing that even just sound like good reminders, stuff I want to do next time. To make your own list, because I can tell you it's this really human feeling where we hear something interesting or that seems useful and think, oh, I'll remember that forever. And then 4 hours later, it's gone. And so I want to ask you to right now even make your own. I want to ask you to make your own list. All right, let's take one step forward. So we're at the real test. What are some good strategies for actually taking those, for working through those questions that are giving us some brief? The two big pitches that I want to make right now is first, I want to ask you just to put some trust in both me and also in the stuff we're about to look at. I can tell you that before I worked at Aurora, my job was to help people get higher scores on the SAT, the ECT, the GRE, even some of those nursing exams. And the stuff that we're about to look at, these are the things that I saw have the biggest impact on scores over and over again. The second pitch I'm going to make is that the worst test-taking strategies are the ones that are really complicated, that have a lot going on. The reason for that is that one, the more complicated the test-taking strategy is, the more like almost like a card counting system, the easier it is to forget something, have something go wrong, and then the whole thing is off. Even if nothing goes wrong, though, the more complicated a test-taking strategy is, like a card counting system, then the more brain space it's also taking up. So it's more complicated. I'm even using more brain space just to remember all this complicated test-taking stuff. Whereas the best test-taking strategies are actually really straightforward and even sometimes kind of simple. They're like literal survival strategies. A literal survival strategy is meant to be really straightforward, really simple, like a 1, 2, 3. So that if you know the strategy and you practice it a couple times, when you're dumped in the wilderness, you go, oh, I know what to do. It's straightforward, and I practiced it 1, 2, 3. That's really exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to look at these straightforward test-taking strategies, like survival test-taking strategies, and we're going to practice them, so that when you're dumped in that wilderness of the test, you can go, oh, I know what to do. 1, 2, 3. I practiced this once before. So here's the first one, and it's called taking apart a question. And the way I would even pitch this is the thing that when I do test autopsies with students, where we try to figure out, okay, what went wrong in the test? This is the thing that most often goes wrong. Even quick temperature of the room, thumbs up in the chat if you've ever gotten a test back and you see, oh, the reason why I got this wrong is I misread the question. I knew how to do it. I just misread the question. Quick thumbs up in the chat if that ever happened to you. Lots of yeses, lots of this. Yeah, got it. So here's part of why that can happen. Why we can, as soon as the test is over, we like get it back. We're like, oh, I know how to do this, but in the moment, misread. So here's why that can happen. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read this question as in the way that I think we read it in our heads when the pressure's on and the adrenaline's pumping a little. So I'm going to read this like the way we read it in our heads in a real test. One noticeable difference between the conclusions reached in the two passages is that, unlike the author of passage 1, the author of passage 2, I got nothing. So then I get a little more on edge, and I try again. I go a little slower, but already I feel my heart pounding. One noticeable difference between the conclusions reached in the two passages is that, unlike the author of passage 2 or passage 1, the author of passage 2, I still am really struggling. So the way to cut against that, the way to sort of, the strategy is called keywording. And what it means is that instead of trying to wrestle with all 14 of these words at the same time, we're going to literally pull out the most important words. So I want to again ask you to blow up the chat. What do you think are the most important words in this question? So check it out. I'm just going to read the words, the keywords we highlighted. So noticeable difference, conclusions, unlike passage 1, passage 2. That generally helps my brain. Even if I take out that last one, noticeable difference, conclusions, passage 1, passage 2. I actually feel like I have a better understanding of what this is asking. So that keywording, it's again, boiling down the question to its most important words instead of trying to wrestle with the more 14 words at once, which brains tend not to like. What the second strategy for those questions, for making sure we're off on the right foot, a way I sometimes put this is I think it's really tempting on a test to want to cruise through the question and get right to the answers. But if I mishear that question, I'm lost. Kind of like how if a friend asks me to do something, if I mishear them, no matter how hard I work, I'm never going to do what they asked me to do because I misheard what they were asking at the beginning. All that to say, just like if a friend asked you to do something, you might paraphrase back to them, right? Be like, wait, are you asking me to yada yada? I want to ask you right now in your head to paraphrase this question, to put it really in your own words. We've keyworded it. If this is if this question was still feeling like it's giving you some trouble, especially, a great strategy is to do that quick paraphrase. What do you think in your own head is this question asking? Cool. So I'm even going to try out loud to almost paraphrase this a little off the cuff. So noticeable difference, conclusions. So there's a noticeable difference between two passages. What is it? Okay, yeah, there's a noticeable difference in the conclusions. What's the difference between passage A and passage B? Now I feel like I'm on a lot better foot. I know what this question's asking me to do. Now the work that I do is setting me off in the right direction. So it might help because we're going to do it now with answers. So what we just did with the question, you can do the same thing with answers. So even we got the same question. So I know I'm looking for a difference between passage 1 and passage 2. Here's the first answer. Passage 2 recommends lighter sentences for violent criminals. All right, so I'm even just going to keyword this one, lighter sentences to violent criminals. Let's look at B. We're just going to look at A and B. We're not going to do all of them to save us some time. B, passage 2 argues that increasing educational yada yada reduce crime. What you can even maybe visually see here, I'm going to do a little drawing, is that a lot of answers are have two parts. You can often even just cut them in half. So like blames politicians and pundits for this thing, believes individual, blah, 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 blah. So by cutting them in half and or keywording, what I can do now is I can go like, great, all right, passage 2. Does passage 2 talk about lighter sentences? Oh yeah, let's say yes. Does it talk about violent criminals? Let's say no. Does passage 2 talk about increasing education? Yes. Reducing crime. And what I'm able to do here is, instead of wrestling with all of the 14 words of the question, all the like 8, 10, 11 words of the answer or whatever, I've boiled it down to the simplest parts, and I can do almost this really quick 1, 2, 3. I've taken all these multiple things that my brain was trying to juggle and turned it instead into almost like a set of stepping stones to get me across the river of this question. Got it. So the question is how to manage time and accuracy. And I totally understand. I'm going really slow through each of these processes so that it makes sense. You can go a little faster, especially once you've done it a few times. But my really big pitch is this really quick, wait, what are the most important words I should look at? You can do it kind of sometimes a little faster, but also that I'm spending a hair more time with the question so that I can then cruise through those answers like I just did. If I didn't do that keywording, even I'll just read this question. One noticeable difference between the conclusions reached in the 2 passages is that, unlike the author of passage 1, the author of passage 2 blames politicians instead of pundits for the increase in criminal behavior. If I don't do that keywording or don't kind of cut apart the answers, if I don't spend a quick extra second with the question, it actually takes longer because my brain has to process all that information at once. I hope that made some sense because I do appreciate it is a concern balancing time versus breaking these things apart. My 2 pitches are breaking these things apart saves more time in the long run, and it really a little more time with the question helps save a little more time with the answers. But that's a really great point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Are we at time? Okay, let's go forward one more. I don't know if I mentioned this. All of the questions that we're looking at are really from those nursing exams, the LSAT, the GRE, and even from real finals at universities. And so I tell you that all these questions are as realistic as possible. And you might see something like them. But I want to ask you to practice, now that we've done that together, to practice on this question. And I will tell you at the beginning, I'm less concerned about you getting the right answer and way more concerned about you just having practiced that strategy once. So what I want to ask you to do is to practice taking apart this question, keywording it, and try keywording some of these answers. And like that person said for time, see if you can even do this a little fast. This is probably my best test taking strategy, but it sometimes is a little hard to describe. So I'm going to really break it down. Here's the way I would put it. So I know when my brain gets 4 answer choices, it's almost like my brain starts trying to come up with a really good explanation for why each one could be true. Like, oh, maybe A is true because da, 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 but B could be true because da, 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 da. So here's a way to cut against that by going in a different direction. And it really looks like this. What I'm going to do for A is actually imagine, okay, if this were true, what would it look like? If B were true, what would that look like? C, D, and by doing that, it makes the differences between the answers seem a little bigger, and you can start to see like, oh wait, this is how each one of these things actually differs from each other, and it sometimes makes one answer really stand out. This is a great strategy, especially if you're between 2, but even in general, if you're feeling a little lost, this imagining what each answer would look like is true is maybe the best test taking strategy I got. Maybe that's a little abstract. Let's make it more concrete by practicing this one. So this, for what it's worth, this question is from a social work final, and I tell you that because I think it's helpful. So the question is, the key to systemic desensitization is to blank. So just for what it's worth, sensitization, I'm making someone more sensitive. Desensitization, I'm trying to make someone less sensitive to something. So again, I'm paraphrasing the question, right? What this is asking me, as I understand it, is I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker. How can I make someone less sensitive to something, less, less touched by something? Let's start right here. So I'm going to actively imagine C. So I'm going to actively imagine I'm a therapist, and I'm going to rapidly progress someone. Feel fear hierarchy. What's that look like? And in my brain, at least, when I picture that, I keep coming back to this word because I think, wait, I'm picturing doing it rapidly. I'm picturing doing it really fast. Like I'm going to mess something up. Why wouldn't I do it slowly? And I'm not sure. I'm not in this field. I don't know for sure, but I'm leaning against C because when I picture rapidly, it feels like more chaotic than I'm comfortable with. It seems like the wrong direction. Let's check out B. So I'm going to make someone less sensitive by having them maintain relaxation while imagining the fear-producing stimuli. So, okay, I'm a social worker. I'm going to have someone imagine what they're afraid of to try to get them less sensitive. So like my client's afraid of spiders. They're going to imagine spiders while trying to stay relaxed. So far, so I don't, at least nothing sticks out as being wrong in my brain. Let's look at A and even check it out. A and B look really similar. Maintain relaxation while imagining the fear-producing stimulus. Maintain relaxation while being exposed to the fear-producing stimulus. So now I'm going to imagine A, and they're going to look a little more different. So I'm going to have my client maintain relaxation while I expose them to the fear-producing stimulus. So in my picture, my client's there, and I'm going to bring in the thing they're afraid of. Like my client's afraid of spiders, and I'm going to bring in spiders to my office. 100% no, because I don't want spiders in my office. You get the idea, though. I'm leaning pretty heavily towards B because I've actively pictured it and started to see those differences getting bigger. So the similar strategy to imagining what each answer would look like if true is you can even turn multiple choice questions into true-false questions. Again, kind of like we talked about before, it's breaking down into smaller steps. Brains like smaller steps and less stuff to concentrate on one thing at a time instead of a whole lot. So here's what that could look like. Here's our question. One difference between a comic and a cartoon is blank. Let's turn them into true-false questions. We'll just do these two. So true or false, a comic is a single pane. Maybe I'll do a little of this too. I'm going to imagine what that would look like. So true or false, a comic is a single pane. If I picture that, a comic, I feel like I picture more panes. Like it's a whole page of panes. Like even Garfield, I think, has 3, right? All right, true or false, only cartoons are funny. I'm going to do this a little bit too. I feel like I can picture that a comic book could be funny. It could make me laugh. So I'm not against this. Again, it's a way to break apart those questions by turning them into true, false. These are 2 great strategies, especially if you're between 2 answers and you're like, what do I do? Flip a coin. Try out actively imagining what would they look like or turn them into true, false questions. What are we looking at next? All right, let's practice it. So again, we're practicing each one of these really fast so that when you get into the real test, it feels a little more familiar. You can do that quick 1, 2, 3 when you're dumped in the wilderness. So the test, same thing. I'm less concerned with you getting the right answer and way more concerned with practicing this process and feeling comfortable with it. So what I want to ask for this one again, I want to ask you to actively picture what would A look like if it were true, B, C, D. Those are the best strategies I got. Here's a couple last ones to have just in your back pocket. One is unfamiliar words. So for example, here's a word, equinophobia. I at least had never heard this word before I put it on for this presentation. The name of the game with unfamiliar words is, can I find anything that looks like a smaller word that I know inside it, even if it just kind of looks like it. So for example, for this one, I'm breaking it apart. I'm seeing phobia. I'll do the first half. Phobia I know is a fear. But I want to ask you right now, equine. What do you think an equine might be? What do you think that might mean? I especially want to hear from you if you don't know, if you're guessing. So if you're guessing and don't know, if you had to guess, put on the spot, what do you think an equine might be? You all are right. I had one student say fear of horses, donkeys, da 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 da. He had the whole definition memorized. You're right, equine, like equestrian. And even I will say, this doesn't always get you to the right answer, but if you can break it apart, you can often kind of get pretty close by finding words you know inside it, because language kind of works that way. Words are just built on top of other words. Since we're a little light at a time, I don't want to break this whole one down. It also, right now, it has the explanation right here, and you'll have this when you need it. But what I really just want to show you is that if you don't know the words, and in this question, you couldn't, because they're pretend. Patient's got Coop's disease. Is co-Tylenol better, or is bi-Tylenol better? You couldn't know those words, because I'm pretty sure they're pretend. Sometimes, even if you don't know what the words mean, the answers can give you clues on how to figure out the question. So I'm even just going to look at, let me make sure I do this right. Yeah, these 2. Co-Tylenol is more appropriate. Bi-Tylenol is more appropriate. Okay, co-Tylenol is more appropriate. Bi-Tylenol is more appropriate. Got it. Both A and B. So wait a second. If A is true, co-Tylenol is more appropriate than bi-Tylenol. And B is true that bi-Tylenol is more appropriate than co-Tylenol. But A is true that you see it, these two things contradict each other. So I actually know that this one has to be right because they can't both be. All of that to say, and again, the explanation's right here, and you'll have it later, is that sometimes those answers actually give you clues to the questions. Last thing, I believe, for test-taking strategies, especially useful in true or false questions, but you'll see them also in multiple choice, absolute determiners, qualifiers. So I'm genuinely worried that this might be a dated reference. Real fast thumbs up in the chat if you've seen the movie An American Tail with a little cartoon mouse, Fievel. I believe it also had a sequel, Fievel Goes West, which was more popular. Thumbs up if you've seen either of these movies. Hey, okay, so last year, no one gave me a thumbs up. I thought, oh, what a tragedy. It's a wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it, American Tail. The reason I'm talking, there are no cats in America. Someone put one of the great songs, There Are No Cats in America. Here's one of the other songs in that movie and why I'm talking about it. There's a song, Never Say Never, or I'll Never Say Never Again, something like that. The reason they say that is it's like as soon as I say never, maybe you've experienced this too, you say, I never am gonna watch that TV show again, and then it's like the next day you watch that TV show. That's why absolute determiners are usually wrong on a test. They have a very narrow wiggle room. So if I say, it is always true that, well, in order for that answer to be right, it has to literally be the case that it's always true. There's no exceptions to that rule. These qualifiers, they're like the exact opposite of absolute determiners. So most, often, primarily, sometimes, usually, they create even more wiggle room, more ways that they could be true. So these aren't always wrong. Never say always, never say never, but they're like red flag words that they're more often than not wrong. Even, I'm just going to scroll up really, really fast. This answer we got rid of for different reasons, but even just looking at only, I can see, oh, it had this other red flag on it too. And even here, always, sure enough. So you can, now that you know to look out for those, you'll see them all the time. So I have no intentions of going through these questions. What I wanted you to visually see is, here's a real question from the GRE. Check out how long those answers are. Here's a real question from the nursing exam, from that NCLEX. Check out how long the question is. And here's the LSAT. Check out how long, nightmarishly long that question is, and it should have some really hard answers. But I wanted you, the reason I wanted you to see that is so you can visually see that all the stuff we just talked about, breaking down a question, how important would that be? Being able to keyword this question, being able to keyword these answers, even that imagining what each one would look like. So everything that we talked about, it's immediately applicable for these tests, especially the hardest tests that you can get. I also have no intentions of talking about essay questions, but I wanted you to have this here for when you have the whole document, and also to know that the reason I don't want to talk about it is this, I keep feeling like is way better if we talk about it one-on-one. Again, in any of those academic coaching appointments, we could talk more about how to set up an essay for an essay question. But if you have those essay questions, I know in history, you often have a lot of them. I want you to have these tools for you so you have a head start, and then feel free, I would highly recommend if you want more, if you're like, oh, I'd love more resources on this, I'd love to talk more about this, setting up an appointment with an academic coach. All right, so we've gotten our first two parts, and here's our last part, and we won't spend quite as much time with it, but what I want you to visually see here is this is what a whole semester can look like. Quick check-in with the chat. Give me a thumbs up if you ever had a class that looked like this, where a teacher talked about something in class, and then that night you had homework on that thing. About a week later, you had a quiz on that same thing. And then about 2 to 3 weeks later, you had a test on that same thing. Thumbs up, you've been in a class that looked like that. A lot of thumbs up really fast. The reason why that's a really classic teaching model, the really classic classroom setup, it's not to give you more work. It's because that 1, 2, 3 is often how you move something from short-term memory into long-term memory. So what that can look like is the same day of class. And there have been studies that show this, that as soon as I get out of class, this invisible stopwatch starts. And it's this forgetting stopwatch, and it has about 24 hours on it. And after 24 hours, anything that I've forgotten from class is gone. And it's like irretrievably gone to the point I have to relearn it from the beginning. Whereas if right after class, sometime, ideally right after, but sometime in that 24 hours, if I again touch the material, now my brain goes, oh, great, let's not forget it. I won't forget it. We looked at it twice. If about a week later, I look at it again, do some study strategies, some work with it, then my brain goes, okay, wait, we looked at this over here, and now we looked at it over here. Let's keep this in short-term memory. Let's set it aside and not get rid of it. About 2 to 3 weeks later, if I look at that material again, that's the moment when my brain goes, okay, I've seen this once, twice, 3 times. Let's just keep it, and it moves it into long-term memory. The idea there, so each class I'm doing a little something to keep myself from forgetting, whether it's looking at the notes. I had some friends in law school who swore by writing summaries of what happened in class after class, and then the end of the week they write a summary, the summaries, and then they write a summary of the summaries of the summaries, and on, so that by the time they got to the real test, and in law school especially, there's a lot to remember. They had all that stuff in their head. You could do something similar. Every class, the day of, I'm doing something with the material. The first week, I'm looking back at what I looked at that week. Week 2, I'm looking back at what I looked at, that week, and maybe even a little here, so that by the time I get to week 6 or whatever your week is, I put all of this stuff into short-term memory, and now I can do what we talked about, really lightly touching the material to move it to reignite those connections. Again, this becomes really important if you're doing a standardized test because you don't have a classroom structure doing it for you, to do that 1, 2, 3, moving stuff into long-term memory. I think this also is really important for online classes, where often, not always, but often in online classes, there's some expectation that you're doing more of that studying on your own. And now you have this kind of visual way for setting it up. And if you want some more of those study strategies, really, again, feel free to set up an appointment with any of those academic coaches at the Academic Support Center. These are 2 resources, 2 tools that you have now. One is if you need to make your own study guide, let's say for the NCLEX, or let's say just because the course instructor didn't give you one, here's a way to do it. Over here, I write down, here's all the stuff I think I'm going to be tested on. So that could be even chapter headings. It could be stuff from, the syllabus, but it could be just bolded terms, definitions, but anything I think I'm going to be tested on, I put over here. And what you have down here is essentially fill in the blank questions that move you up this ladder of really knowing a thing. So for example, I know that a lot of nursing exams are over here on the applying level, where you have to remember what the symptoms mean, understand how the symptoms connect to each other, and be able to figure out, how do I apply this? What do I actually do when a patient comes in with these symptoms? For what it's worth, test questions can go all the way up here. They usually don't go all the way here, but they can even go up here. Evaluating, you get this on nursing exams. Here's all the symptoms of the patient. What should you do first, or what's most important? That's up here. And what you have now are these fill in the blanks. So like, I'm going to use a goofy example, mitochondria. What is a mitochondria? What are the parts of a mitochondria? How does a mitochondria act? What would happen if you remove the mitochondria from a cell? You get kind of the idea. Those fill in the blanks move you up that ladder. For what it's worth, a lot of stuff on Quizlet is over here. It's in remembering. I'm not knocking Quizlet. It's a great study tool. I just want you to know it tends to be closer to over here with remembering, where your tests, especially, kind of across the board, your tests might be pushing you to answer questions over here. Last, please just give me a really fast thumbs up again. I know when I was in college, I sometimes felt like when I would start to study the week before a final, I would feel almost this initial sense of overwhelm, where I'd be like, how am I supposed to study all of this at the same time? Like I was trying to learn everything over again all at once. Thumbs up if you ever had that feeling. I really don't think I'm alone in that. So what this tool really is, again, it's pretty straightforward, but I just want to walk you through it so you know how to use it. It's a way to break down so that you're not having to try to learn or study everything all at once in that week before, or even review everything all at once. The way it works, again, is I'm breaking down all this stuff that I want to study into 4 or 5 parts. And you could, just like we did up here, be like, what are those, that headings in a textbook, headings in the syllabus, even the course calendar, maybe. You could even take the study guide you have and just divide it into 4 or 5 parts. But once you have it divided into what 4 or 5 more or less what feel like equal parts, you can do this. This is a way to pace out studying. So on day 1, I'm only looking at part A, nothing else, just part A, the first thing, the first chunk of what I want to study. Day 2, I'm looking mostly for like 2 hours or whatever on chunk B, the second thing I want to study, and a little on chunk A. Day 3, big chunk of C, little b, little a. You get the idea. The reason for this is by the time I get to day 5, I haven't completely forgotten this stuff at day 1, because I was touching it a little bit the whole time, but I've also managed to look at and study a whole lot of different material throughout a 5-day period. And you could do this even, you could keep going for like a week, 10 days if you needed, if you wanted. Again, really helpful for any of those of y'all taking a standardized test, especially. I think some folks might be here who are looking at the NCLEX soon. This is especially really helpful for breaking down those giant books you got to study for those tests. Chat, so you have it. With test taking anxiety, I want you to kind of be going away or taking away 2 things. 1 is a whole lot of resources, and 2 are some go-to initial steps for managing test taking anxiety. What I wish I could give you is, I really wish I could give you like a sentence that would, or 1 tool that would just make test taking anxiety go away. It's not there. But I don't have that sentence. I don't have that tool because they don't exist. With test taking, it's always going to be at least a little stressful. It's rare that a test is like 0% stressful. And so part of the trick is figuring out how best to manage the stress, which both these folks can do, and how best to manage the test, which again, those academic coaches can do. This resource, by the way, so Aurora University has counseling services, especially if the anxiety is feeling a sense of real overwhelm or feels bigger than just the test. This is a great service. Aurora also has subscribed for you all a telehealth service called Timely Care that is a Talk Now feature where you can talk now, and the other end of the line is a licensed clinician. And test taking anxiety, my suspicion, is something they've seen a whole lot of, or even just that general sort of stress of college, which is very real and sometimes really quite a burden. So you have these resources. The other, for what it's worth, reason that there's not just one test taking tool that I could give you that would just solve it, is test taking anxiety can actually mean a few different things. It's not just one thing. So I'll even start here. I know that I sometimes get nervous before I do a presentation like this. Usually it's like a few days beforehand. And so I've had to try to figure out why and where's that coming from and what do I do? What I figured out, what works for me at least, is that when I get that initial sense of nervousness, if I do something about it, like if I, for example, someone said going for a walk is a study strategy. If I go for a walk and just practice in my head what I'm going to do in the presentation, it's like I'm proving that worry wrong. Or even I sometimes feel like when I get that nervousness, it's almost like the back of my brain is trying to talk to me. The back of the brain, the part that you can't lie to, no matter how hard you try, it's almost like it's saying like, hey, have you done enough work yet? Have you studied enough? I've noticed you're watching a lot of Netflix. Do you have this handled? But instead of saying that, it just kind of releases some sense of nervousness. And maybe that you'll find, oh, that's really true of me, but maybe not. Which is why I, again, really recommend a common tool for managing that test taking anxiety is to literally write down. Again, as we talked about, it makes it smaller, more visually manageable, less like that whirl of undefined feeling. But it also makes it so that you can start doing something like this. Are there any common themes in my list? Are there actually causes that I can kind of picture before the things in my list? And then if you wanted to on your own, you could start even doing some experimenting or set up a problem solution grid. So if like, okay, here's my list of stuff I'm feeling worried about. what do I feel like I could do to start trying to manage it? You could, again, if you came in with a list to either of these folks, you'd be pretty set. But you also, if you wanted, you could try doing some of that experimenting on your own. I sometimes pitch this as if you're doing that experimenting, it's like you're trying to be a really compassionate scientist, of being not as unjudgmental as possible, compassionate to yourself of, okay, what would happen if I tried this? Or like, what if this is really the thing that's bothering me? Last, and kind of maybe similar to that, is watching negative self-talk. This is you'll see this on, I think, every list of managing test-taking anxiety. The reason is when that self-talk, when the stuff I'm saying in my head turns negative, and that might sound like, for example, I can't do this. This class is too hard. I'm going to mess this up. When it starts turning negative like that, it's really easy for that talk to turn into something I believe. And so it can be really worth, as best you can, interrupting or just talking back to the self-talk. What that can sound like is, hey, I don't think that's true, actually. I think that I've done a lot and I'm doing my best. I think that I've actually put together a whole system and I've really put in the work all semester for studying. Heck, I went to a whole presentation on test taking to learn better stuff. I'm doing the right things. I'm doing the best I can. I actually think that I'm pretty well set up for this test. To literally say that into a brain can actually have an effect. If that ever feels really awkward or like it feels silly at first, another way that you can try it out is to actively imagine the negative self-thought that you're thinking. If you imagine a friend or someone you care about saying exactly what you just said to in your self-talk, you imagine a friend or someone you care about saying that to you, what advice would you give them? It's kind of a profound effect when you imagine someone that you care about saying those things, and it can even start being a thing where it's like, oh, I can even treat myself like I'm someone I care about. Last, if that stuff fails, remember to breathe, especially that morning of the test. This can even be a really quick inhale, counting to 5, hold counting to 5, exhale, that physiologically can slow the heart. So I did not plan this. This is a different resource from a different university, and I just want you to see. So again, lots of symptoms, test anxiety, but here's some of the stuff they recommend for test anxiety. Have a study plan, like we talked about. Have a good night's sleep, like we talked about. Eat a good breakfast, like we talked about. So all this stuff that we just looked at not only helps with test taking, but it also proves to the back of the brain that you're doing stuff the right way and gets you set off on a better foot. So Alicia, I wanted to come back to you because I know you had a question about the partially correct one. So I'm going to read the question, kind of get it in my brain. I'm going to read Alicia's question out loud. I have a question that I would like to ask. In social work, when you take tests, sometimes there aren't clear answers. Oh, so maybe if there's not a clear answer, that imagining what each one would look like if true can actually separate them out a little, but I am with you. Here's the other part of your question though. Many choices can be partially correct. In this case, do you have strategies for choosing the most right answer? How do you figure out the most right answer? The first thing that I just want to highlight that you're pointing to correctly is that all multiple choice, especially those standardized tests, are actually about the most right. They're not about, they're about, how do I put this? They're about the best answer, not always like the perfect answer. And just even knowing that, I'm looking for the best answer, not the perfect answer, like you are, has you off on the right foot. In terms of the most right answer, I would hate to, the things that actively imagining what each one looks like might help. The other thing that can help is even kind of doing a quick ranking system of like a scale of 1 to 5, almost like we did, of being like, okay, I narrowed this down, let's say to 3. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how correct do I think A is? How correct do I think B is? How correct do I think C? And then literally picking the one that has the highest number. Because you're right, sometimes you get it between a couple and it's harder to pick. If you do that quick ranking, it sometimes is a little easier. I just want to really thank you for coming out and know that at the Academic Support Center, we're all wishing you good luck and good weeks in the beginning of a new semester. Again, thank you very much and take care. Bye.